The Dominion fleet picked Daytona Beach because their scanners said it was the easiest target on the planet. 500,000 humans packed onto one strip of road, completely unarmed, completely unprotected, completely distracted by something called Bike Week. No tanks, no soldiers, no walls. Just leather jackets and loud engines. The invasion commander called it the softest target in galactic history. He was wrong. He didn't know that the loudest sound on Main Street wasn't a weapon. It was a warning, and in about 10 minutes, 300 bikers were going to make him wish he'd picked literally anywhere else in the universe. If you're ready for one of the dumbest, proudest nights in human history, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and drop a comment with where you'd want aliens to mess with humanity next. Now buckle up because this trip down Main Street is about to get loud. Daytona Beach, Florida, early March, the kind of week the whole town builds its calendar around. 500,000 motorcycles rolling in from every direction, engines echoing off the hotels, chrome catching the sun like the whole street was on fire. Main Street had transformed overnight. Leather vendors lined the sidewalks. Custom choppers sat parked in rows so long you couldn't see the end of them. The smell of fried food and gasoline hung in the air, and somewhere down by the Boot Hill Saloon, a band was already playing classic rock loud enough to rattle windows 3 blocks away. This wasn't a polite little parade. This was Bike Week, and it had been running for almost 90 years. Grandfathers had ridden this same stretch of road back when it was just a strip of sand and a dream. Now their grandkids rode it on machines that cost more than houses, parked next to rusted old Harleys held together with duct tape and pride. Nobody cared what you rode here. They only cared that you showed up. Up in orbit, completely unnoticed by anyone holding a beer, a Dominion scout ship drifted behind the moon's shadow, recording everything. The Dominion was not new to conquest. They had taken 11 worlds in the last 2 centuries, and every single one of those worlds fell the same way. Find the weak point. Find where the population gathers without protection. Strike there first, break their spirit, and the rest of the planet folds within days. Their scanners had been watching Earth for months, cataloging cities, counting military bases, mapping defenses. And then their sensors locked onto Daytona Beach during the 2nd week of March, and the data made the analysts on the bridge go very quiet. 500,000 humans. Packed onto a few miles of open road. No visible armor, no checkpoints, no military presence beyond a few local police directing traffic. Loud machines everywhere, but nothing that registered as a weapon on any scan. The analysts flagged it immediately and sent the report straight to the commander. Commander Drask Vorlin stood at the center of the bridge, arms crossed, studying the readout with the calm satisfaction of a man who had just been handed a gift. Drask had commanded the conquest of 3 different systems. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His soldiers respected him because he was always right, and tonight, looking at this footage of 500,000 unarmed primates gathered in one place, he was certain he was right again. "This is the place," he said. "No fortifications, no formation, no discipline. They are practically inviting us." His second-in-command, a sharp young officer named Felk Doran, leaned over the display. "Commander, the readings show unusually high noise levels." "Possible weapon test?" Drask studied the waveform. It pulsed in rhythmic bursts, deep and rolling, the same pattern repeating over and over down the length of the street. "No," he said after a moment. "It's some kind of ritual chant. Primitive species often use sound to bond before gathering. It means nothing tactically." He had no idea that the sound on his screen was 60,000 Harley-Davidson engines idling in formation down Main Street. And that to the people standing in that crowd, that sound meant something closer to a heartbeat than a chant. Drask gave the order. Recon Team Talon would descend after dark, blend into the crowd disguised as locals, identify the leadership structure, and mark the location for the main invasion force, scheduled to arrive within 48 hours. Standard procedure: quiet, clean, efficient, 12 soldiers prepped for departure. Among them was a younger soldier named Brancalo, newer to the unit, eager to prove himself, and a grizzled veteran named Orsk Thane, who had survived 4 planetary campaigns and trusted nothing he hadn't personally verified twice. As the shuttle prepared for descent, Orsk studied the live feed one more time. Humans dressed in leather from head to toe, machines polished like jewelry, flags on poles. Patches sewn into vests like rank insignia. He frowned. Commander, he said slowly, these markings on their clothing, they look like unit symbols. Could this be some kind of military gathering disguised as a festival? Drask waved the concern away without even looking up. Doubtful. Our scans show no centralized command structure. If they had military discipline, our sensors would have detected it instantly. Orsk didn't argue, but as the shuttle dropped through the clouds toward the glowing strip of Main Street below. Lights flashing, engines roaring, thousands of strangers laughing together like one massive family that had known each other for decades. He couldn't shake the feeling that something about this readout was very, very wrong. The shuttle landed in a dark patch behind a closed gas station 2 miles off Main Street, exactly as planned. The 12 soldiers stepped out into the warm Florida night, disguises engaged, human faces and human clothing settling into place over their true forms. They looked like bikers. Leather jackets, boots, sunglasses despite the darkness. It should have been perfect cover. What none of them realized yet was that, looking like a biker and knowing how to walk into a biker crowd without getting noticed were two very different skills. And in less than an hour, that difference was going to start causing problems they had never trained for. The 12 aliens walked the 2 miles toward Main Street in total silence, boots crunching over gravel, scanning every shadow for threats that weren't there. Bren Kahlo kept glancing nervously at the glow on the horizon, the noise growing louder with every step. Orsk Thane walked at the back of the formation, watching his squad's backs, still turning that earlier conversation over in his mind. When they finally crested the small rise that opened onto the edge of Main Street, all 12 of them stopped at once. The street stretched out in front of them, packed wall to wall with motorcycles and people, lit up in red and gold and blue from 1,000 neon signs. Music poured out of every open doorway. Smoke rose from food trucks, selling things the squad's scanners couldn't even identify. A line of custom choppers gleamed under string lights outside a building with a sign that Red Boot Hill Saloon, and beneath the sign, a hand-painted slogan, "Order a drink and have a seat." You're better off here than across the street. Drask, walking at the front in his human disguise, surveyed the chaos and felt his confidence solidify into certainty. No formation, he murmured to his squad. No chain of command, just noise. This will be the easiest survey we've ever conducted. They split into 3 teams of 4 as planned. Drask's team moved toward the center of Main Street to locate anyone who looked like a leader. Felk's team moved toward the beachside vendors to study the layout. Orsk's team, with young Bren tagging along, was assigned to slip into the crowd near the saloon and gather intelligence on local customs. It took less than 4 minutes for the plan to fall apart. A massive man with a gray beard down to his chest, wearing a leather vest covered in patches, spotted Orsk's group standing stiffly at the edge of the sidewalk like they'd never seen pavement before. He grinned and walked straight toward them, arms wide. "First bike week, fellas," Orsk's translator scrambled to process the greeting. "We are visiting," he said carefully. The big man laughed, a booming sound that made several nearby people turn and smile. "Yeah, you got that look. Don't worry, everybody's a little lost their first year. Name's Earl." "You boys ride in from far?" "Far," Orsk agreed, which was, in a sense, the most honest thing he'd said all night. Earl clapped him on the shoulder hard enough that Orsk's disguise flickered for a fraction of a second before stabilizing. "Well, hell, you're standing here like a bunch of lost puppies. Come on, I'll buy you boys a beer and show you where the real action's at." Bren leaned toward Orsk, voice low. "Sir, is this a trap?" Orsk studied Earl's face. There was no calculation in it, no hidden agenda, nothing his combat training had ever taught him to recognize as a threat. Just simple, overwhelming friendliness, the kind that didn't ask for anything in return. "I do not believe so," Orsk said slowly. "I believe this is simply how they behave." It got stranger from there. Within 20 minutes, Earl had introduced the squad to no fewer than 6 other riders, all of whom shook hands, asked where they were from, complimented their costumes, and insisted on buying them drinks despite repeated, increasingly confused refusals. One woman with silver hair and a denim vest patched with decades of rally pins looked Bren up and down and declared that he had good bones for riding and should consider buying a bike before he went home. Bren had no idea what that meant, but it seemed to be a compliment, so he said thank you, which seemed to delight her even further. Meanwhile, across the street, Drask's team was facing a completely different kind of confusion. They had identified what they believed to be a command structure. Men and women wearing identical leather vests with the same symbol stitched on the back, moving in loose groups, occasionally gathering around tables to discuss something with great seriousness. Drask approached one such group, a cluster of riders huddled over a folding table covered in maps and route sheets, debating loudly. This had to be it, the leadership. You, Drask said, stepping closer with as much authority as his disguise could project. Identify your rank within this structure. The man closest to him, a heavy-set rider with an unlit cigar clamped in his teeth, looked up and squinted. Rank, buddy, this is the Poker Run Committee. We're figuring out which gas stations got the cheapest fuel for tomorrow's route. Poker, Drask repeated. This is a combat strategy session. The man laughed so hard he nearly dropped his cigar. It's a charity ride, pal. $5 a stop, all goes to the folks who don't got a roof over their heads. You want in? $20 gets you a card and a plate of barbecue at the finish line. Drask had absolutely no framework for processing an organized, voluntary, financially motivated act of communal kindness disguised as a card game. His tactical scanner offered him 3 possible classifications, and then, much like the scanner in the New Orleans data, the Dominion had once filed away as a cautionary tale. Simply gave up and displayed, unable to determine threat level. He moved on, increasingly rattled, just as a deep rumble rolled down Main Street. Headlights. Dozens of them in a slow-moving line, chrome polished to mirror brightness, each bike more outrageous than the last. A custom build with an actual fish tank built into the gas tank rolled past, followed by a chopper stretched so long it needed an escort just to take corners. The crowd erupted into cheering, whistling, and applause like they were watching a parade of heroes. Drask stared at the procession, utterly speechless. This was not a military formation. It was not a leadership convoy. It was, according to the badge hanging from the nearest judge's table, a custom bike show, and apparently the stretched chopper was the heavy favorite to win best in show. Behind him, Felk's voice crackled through the comm link, tight with confusion. Commander, my team has lost visual on 2 of our soldiers. Drask's blood ran cold under his human disguise. Lost how? There was a pause filled with distant laughter and the clink of glasses. They were invited inside the saloon for a drink. They have not yet returned. Drask looked down the glittering, roaring length of Main Street, packed with the friendliest, loudest, most disorganized army he had ever encountered, and felt something he had not felt in any of his previous campaigns. He felt the mission slipping out of his hands, one handshake at a time. By 11 o'clock, Recon Team Talon was no longer a recon team. It was a problem spreading in 12 different directions across Main Street, and Drask Vorlin was beginning to understand it in real time. He found Felk near the entrance to the Boot Hill Saloon, standing rigid while a bartender slid a tall glass across the counter toward him. I did not order this, Felk said. It's on the house, the bartender said. You looked thirsty, and besides, anybody wearing a jacket that clean during bike week needs to relax a little. Felk turned to Drask with something close to panic in his eyes. Commander, they are giving away resources for free. There is no transactional logic. I cannot calculate their motive. Their motive is hospitality, Drask said, though he didn't fully believe it himself yet. Where are the rest of your team? Felk pointed toward the back of the bar, where 2 of his soldiers were seated at a long wooden table, deep in conversation with a group of riders who'd apparently decided the strangers needed company. One of his men, a normally stone-faced soldier named Trell, was laughing. Actually laughing at something a leather-clad grandmother had just said about her husband's driving. Drask pulled Trell aside the moment he could. Report, what have you learned about their command structure? Trell blinked, his disguise's human face still carrying traces of an unfamiliar expression. Commander, there is no command structure. There are clubs, groups of riders who choose to ride together. No one orders anyone to do anything. They simply show up every year for decades. Because they want to? That's impossible. No civilization holds together without enforced hierarchy. Trell hesitated, an unusual thing for a Dominion soldier to do. I asked the woman at that table what would happen if someone in her club broke a rule. She said they'd probably just talk it out over a beer. Commander, there is no punishment system here that I can identify, and yet the structure has lasted, by her account, longer than her own life. Drask had no answer for that. He moved on, deeper into the crowd, trying to relocate Orsk's team, and that's when he found the next problem. Bren Kahlo, young, eager, recently terrified of every human he met, was now standing on the back of a flatbed trailer wearing a borrowed leather vest, holding a microphone. While a local rally announcer introduced him to several hundred cheering bikers as this year's mystery rider in the costume contest. "Sir," Bren said into the comm link, voice cracking with panic even as the crowd roared with approval below him, "I do not know how I arrived at this location." "Get down from there," Drask hissed. "I attempted to decline 3 times. They interpreted my refusal as modesty. I have now been awarded a trophy." Drask closed his eyes. Behind him, Orsk approached, looking more troubled than Drask had ever seen him in 4 campaigns together. "Commander, we need to speak." Privately, they stepped into the narrow gap between 2 food trucks, the smell of grilling onions thick in the air, the noise of the street muffled just enough to talk. "I have been speaking with several riders for the better part of an hour," Orsk said. "I asked them why they keep coming back year after year to the same stretch of road in the same heat, spending money they could save elsewhere. Commander, their answers were nearly identical. They said it feels like coming home. They said the people here would help them if their bike broke down on the highway, help them if they got hurt, help them if they needed a place to sleep for the night. And ask for nothing back except that they do the same for someone else someday." Drask frowned. "Sentiment, useful for morale, irrelevant to strategic assessment. Sir, with respect, I do not think it is irrelevant." Orsk lowered his voice further. "I asked one rider what would happen if a stranger showed up here with no money, no bike, nothing but the clothes on his back. He said, and I quote, 'We'd probably feed him before we even asked his name.' Commander, that is not the behavior of a disorganized population. That is the behavior of a population that has built loyalty so deep it doesn't need rules to enforce it." For the first time since landing, Drask felt a genuine flicker of unease. He looked back out at the street, at the endless river of leather and chrome and laughing strangers who had apparently decided, without any order from any commander, that 12 nervous tourists deserved free drinks, friendly advice, and a costume trophy. He activated his comm, calling his teams back toward the rally point near the saloon to regroup and reassess. One by one, they trickled in, all except one. "Where is Soldier Drennick?" Drask asked, scanning the gathering group. Silence, then Felk's voice hesitant, "Commander." "He may have joined a riding club." "Explain." "He was approached by 3 members of an organization calling themselves the Iron Wolves. They offered him a patch and a seat in their formation for tomorrow's group ride to the Speedway. He accepted before any of us could stop him." Drask stared at his second-in-command in disbelief. "He accepted a permanent affiliation with a local faction. Without authorization. He said," Felk continued carefully, "and again I am only relaying his exact words, that he has never felt like he belonged to anything before." Down the street, the rumble of 100 engines rose into the night air as another group of riders pulled out for a midnight cruise along the beach road, headlights cutting through the dark, laughter trailing behind them like smoke. Drask Vorlin, commander of 3 successful planetary campaigns, stood in the middle of the strangest battlefield of his career. Watching his own soldier ride off into the Florida night with a patch on his jacket and a grin on his disguised human face, and understood with a sinking feeling that something about tonight had already gone further than any briefing could have predicted. And somewhere above the clouds, the timer on the next phase of the invasion was still running. Midnight came and went, and Drask Vorlin finally accepted a hard truth. His recon team was no longer following orders. They were following vibes, and the vibes were winning. He gathered what remained of his composure and called for an emergency assembly near the saloon's back lot, where a row of motorcycles gleamed under a string of patio lights. 11 soldiers showed up. Drennick, the one who had joined the Iron Wolves, did not. Bren arrived still holding his costume trophy, refusing to let it go even when ordered. "This ends now," Drask said. "We return to the shuttle immediately and submit our report. Whatever sentiment has infected this team will not infect my judgment." "Commander," Orsk said quietly, "before we go, I think you should hear something." He gestured toward the open doorway of the Boot Hill Saloon, where Earl, the gray-bearded biker who had first approached Orsk's team, was now standing on a small stage with a microphone mid-speech, addressing a crowd that had gone unusually quiet for Bike Week. Drask, against his better judgment, walked closer to listen. And you all know Charlie's bike caught fire on I-95 last spring, Earl was saying. Engine just went up right there on the highway. Charlie's standing on the shoulder thinking his whole trip's done, thinking he's stuck 200 miles from home with nothing but a melted bike and a bad attitude. And what happened? The crowd, scattered with people who clearly already knew the story, started grinning. 6 different riders pulled over, Earl continued. Strangers. Didn't know Charlie from anybody. One of them had a trailer, hauled the bike to a shop. Another one gave Charlie a ride the rest of the way to Daytona. 3 more chipped in to help cover the repair bill. Nobody asked him for a club patch. Nobody asked what he believed, who he voted for, what kind of bike he rode. They just saw a man stuck on the side of the road and figured that could be any one of us next year. The crowd raised their glasses. Someone shouted Charlie's name, and a man near the front, presumably Charlie himself, raised his drink with a grin and a nod. That's the only rule out here, Earl said, voice carrying clean across the lot. You see somebody who needs help, you help them, that's it. Doesn't matter what patch is on your back. We're all just trying to get down the same road together. The crowd erupted into applause and clinking glasses, and Drask stood frozen at the edge of it. His tactical training, offering absolutely nothing useful to say about what he'd just witnessed. Orsk stepped beside him. Commander, I have seen 4 planetary cultures up close. Every one of them required fear, punishment, or scarcity to maintain order. This is the first population I have studied that appears to maintain order through generosity alone. I do not believe our standard invasion protocol accounts for this variable. Drask said nothing. He was watching Bren, still clutching his trophy, listening to Earl's speech with an expression that no longer looked like fear. It looked like longing. Before Drask could regroup his thoughts, his comm crackled with an incoming transmission from orbit. The main fleet checking in ahead of schedule. Recon Team Talon report status. Invasion force preparing for descent in 6 hours. Confirm landing zone and population vulnerability assessment. Drask hesitated for the first time in his military career. Every instinct told him to deliver the report exactly as planned. No fortifications, no military presence, soft population, easy target. The fleet commander would accept nothing less than a confident, decisive assessment. But standing here, watching strangers raise glasses to a man named Charlie, they'd helped without being asked. Watching one of his own soldiers abandon his post for a leather patch and a sense of belonging. Watching 500,000 humans police themselves through nothing but mutual loyalty and a shared love of the open road. Drask understood something his briefing officers back home had never prepared him for. This was not a soft target. This was something far stranger and far more dangerous. A population that didn't need walls because every single person in the crowd had quietly, voluntarily, become someone else's wall. He opened his mouth to answer the fleet commander, and that's when the night air shattered with the deep, rolling thunder of headlights coming up Main Street. Dozens of them, then hundreds. All moving in formation toward the saloon. Not a parade, not a cruise. Word had apparently spread fast through the rally about 12 strange tourists who'd been acting odd all night, asking strange questions, vanishing oddly. Refusing drinks they should have had no reason to refuse. And riding at the front of that pack, Josette, eyes locked directly on Drask Vorlin, was a biker Drask hadn't met yet. A woman in her 60s with silver hair under a half-helmet, 3 decades of rally patches on her vest, and the calm, unshakable look of someone who had personally never lost an argument in her life. She killed her engine in front of the saloon, swung off her bike with the ease of someone who'd done it 10,000 times, and looked Drask Vorlin dead in the eye. "All right, sweetheart," she said. "Why don't you tell me who you really are?" For one long, dangerous second, nobody moved. The woman, whose vest patch read Ruth in stitched letters above a faded eagle, stood with her arms crossed. Surrounded by at least 40 riders, who had quietly fanned out behind her without a single word of instruction. No weapons drawn, no shouting, just a wall of leather and steady eyes that made it absolutely clear nobody was leaving this lot until questions got answered. Drask's tactical instincts screamed at him to retreat, to signal the fleet, to abandon the mission entirely. But 11 of his soldiers stood scattered through this crowd, disguises straining, loyalties already half rewritten by a single night on Main Street. And the only thing keeping the entire operation from collapsing into chaos was whatever he said in the next 10 seconds. "We are travelers," Drask said carefully, "nothing more. Ruth studied him with the patience of a woman who had heard every excuse a man had ever tried on her. Travelers don't flinch every time somebody hugs them. Travelers don't refuse free beer like it's gonna kill them. And travelers sure as hell don't disappear into thin air the second somebody asks where they parked their bike, because not one of you actually has one. Behind her, Earl stepped forward. Arms crossed, the friendliness from earlier replaced with something firmer. We don't care if you're running from the law, running from a bad marriage, or running from something stranger than that. Out here we got one rule. You tell us straight and we'll have your back. You lie to us, that's when we got a problem. Drask looked at his soldiers. Orsk gave the smallest nod, the universal signal of a veteran telling his commander there was no tactical advantage left in this fight, only an honest one. Drask took a breath, and for the first time in his career abandoned the script entirely. His disguise flickered. Gray skin emerged beneath the human mask, his eyes shifting to the deep black of his true form, his height stretching half a foot taller than the man he'd been pretending to be seconds before. The crowd didn't scream, a few gasped. Somebody near the back muttered, "Well, that's new." Most of them just stared, waiting, the way you'd wait for someone to finish a sentence rather than run from it. "My name is Drask Vorlin," he said, voice carrying clearly across the silent lot. "I am a commander of the Dominion Expansionary Fleet. We were sent to assess this gathering as a potential landing point for a planetary invasion." Dead silence. Then Ruth, without missing a beat, said, "Huh." Bike weeks brought in weirder. A ripple of laughter broke the tension, not mocking, just genuinely amused. The kind of laughter that comes from people who have truly seen everything Main Street could throw at them over 40 years, and decided long ago that nothing surprised them twice. "You're telling me," Earl said, stepping closer, "that you flew across space, picked Daytona Beach during the 1 week we're all out here at our loudest, friendliest, most chaotic, and figured this was your easy way in. Our scanners detected no organized defense," Drask admitted. "No fortifications, no military presence." "Course you didn't," Ruth said. "There ain't a fence in the world keeping this crowd together." "Never needed one?" She gestured at the riders behind her, at the street beyond them glowing with 1,000 headlights, and the distant thump of music still rolling from 3 blocks away. "You want to know what's holding 500,000 people together out here with no army watching over us? It's that every single person in this crowd already decided, a long time ago, that they'd rather take care of each other than wait for somebody else to do it." Drask's translator processed the words cleanly. But something about them landed differently than any data point ever had. He thought of Drennick riding off with a borrowed patch on his jacket. He thought of Trell laughing at a stranger's joke. He thought of Bren standing on a flatbed trailer holding a trophy he refused to put down. "You called us a soft target," Ruth continued, voice steady, not angry, just absolutely certain. "Let me tell you something about soft. Soft is showing up to a stranger's funeral because his bike broke down once and you never forgot the favor. Soft is riding 200 miles in the rain because somebody's kid needs medicine money and a poker runs the fastest way to get it there. We ain't soft because we're weak, mister. We're soft because we decided a long time ago that kindness costs us nothing and saves somebody else everything." Drask looked over his shoulder at his squad. All 11 of them stood among the crowd now, not separated, not surrounded as prisoners, simply standing among the riders like they belonged there. Because somewhere over the course of one chaotic night, they actually had started to. His comm crackled again, the fleet commander impatient, demanding the final assessment before authorizing the invasion descent. "Recon Team Talon, final report, now." Drask looked at Ruth, at Earl. At the endless glowing river of Main Street behind them, alive with music and laughter and 500,000 strangers who had built something stronger than any wall the Dominion had ever broken through. He keyed the comm and for the first time in his career told the absolute truth. "Belay the invasion, this world is not weak. It is something we have never encountered before, and our weapons were never built to fight it." The fleet commander did not believe him at first. No commander in Dominion history had ever called off a campaign over what their official records would later, almost reluctantly, classify as extreme communal loyalty behavior. But when the full recording reached the Dominion High Council weeks later, showing soldier after soldier abandoning protocol not out of fear, but out of genuine belonging, the Council made a decision that would shape Dominion's strategy for the next century. Earth's classification was changed from vulnerable to unconventional resistance, exercise extreme caution. Daytona Beach, specifically the second week of March, was flagged as an annual high-risk zone for what the official Dominion report awkwardly translated as voluntary social cohesion exceeding tactical threat thresholds. In simpler terms, don't mess with the bikers. Drask Vorlon returned to his fleet that night with 11 of his 12 soldiers. Drennick stayed behind. Officially, Dominion records list him as lost in the field. Unofficially, anyone who attends Daytona Bike Week today might notice a quiet member of the Iron Wolves Riding Club, taller than most, a little too pale for Florida sun even after years of riding, who shows up every single March without fail and never misses a poker run. Drask himself was never quite the same after that night. He kept the report short in his official log, citing unforeseen population resilience, but in private he kept something else too, a small enamel pin shaped like a chrome eagle, given to him by Ruth herself as he boarded the shuttle back to his ship. "Figure you earned it," she'd said. "You came in thinking you were the predator. Turns out you were just the new guy who hadn't found his people yet." Drask never fully understood why he kept that pin clipped inside his jacket for every mission afterward. He told himself it was a tactical reminder, a way to recognize unconventional threats in the future. But late at night, alone on the bridge of his ship, staring out at the stars, he sometimes thought about the warmth of that crowded lot, the laughter, the unearned kindness handed to 12 strangers who had arrived planning conquest and left with a costume trophy, a club patch, and a profound, unshakable confusion about what made a population truly strong. 3 more invasion attempts were planned against Earth in the years that followed, all by rival factions who had heard whispers of a soft, vulnerable planet ripe for the taking. Each time, Dominion forces intercepted them quietly, citing strategic interest in protecting an asset under observation. None of the would-be invaders ever learned the real reason. None of them would have believed it anyway, because the truth was almost too simple for any military mind to accept. Earth hadn't survived because of weapons, or walls, or armies standing in formation. It had survived because somewhere on a stretch of road in Florida, 500,000 strangers had spent 100 years quietly proving, one helping hand at a time, that the strongest defense any world could ever build wasn't steel. It was each other. Every March the engines still roar down Main Street, the chrome still gleams under the lights. Somewhere in that crowd, if you look closely enough, you might spot a rider a little taller than the rest, sunglasses on even at night. Grinning at a joke he's heard 100 times but still laughs at like it's brand new. He always rides at the front of the Iron Wolves. He never misses a year. And if you ever find yourself stuck on the side of I-95 with a busted engine and nowhere to go, don't be surprised if he's one of the first to pull over. That's just how it works out there. That's the only rule that ever mattered. If this story got you fired up, smash that like button, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and drop a comment telling me which city you think the aliens should mess with next. Share this with somebody who'd appreciate a good underdog story, and I'll see you in the next one.